My name, David Michaels. Age, 38. Occupation, senior marketing executive. I had always thought my marriage to Laura, 36, was built on trust. We had been together for 7 years, and I had always prided myself on being a good husband, supportive, understanding, and there when she needed me. We had built a life together that many envied. Our relationship, like most relationships, had its ups and downs, but I believed we had worked through every issue. Or so I thought. The signs had been there for months, though. I just hadn't seen them. Little things at first. Missed calls, secretive text messages, and her strange behavior when I asked about her day. But I convinced myself that it was all in my head. Laura was a professional woman, always on the go, and I trusted her. After all, she was the woman I married, the one I shared my dreams with. But one afternoon, everything changed. It was a Saturday, and Laura had been out of town for a business trip. She had been away for 3 days, and I had spent the time working on a few projects. It was a quiet day, and I decided to take a break, relax, and watch some TV. As I sat there flipping through channels, my phone buzzed. A notification from Laura's phone. It wasn't a message from her, but from Thomas, her colleague from work. "Can't wait to see you next weekend. It's been too long. Let's make it special." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. Thomas. I knew that name. Laura had mentioned him a few times, but I had always dismissed it. They were colleagues after all. But now, seeing these words, the tone, I felt a rush of disbelief flood my mind. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her immediately? Should I let it go? But deep down, I already knew. I had been living in a lie for the past 5 years. The image I had of my marriage was a facade, and I had been too blind to see it. I had trusted her without question, and she had betrayed that trust. I couldn't just ignore it, so I decided to confront her that evening. But as the hours passed, I found myself struggling with what I should say. How could I even begin this conversation? What if I was wrong? I tried to shake off the gnawing feeling in my stomach, but it only got worse. When Laura returned home later that evening, she seemed completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. She walked in with her usual cheerful smile, but I couldn't bring myself to greet her with the same enthusiasm. Instead, I just stared at her, my eyes filled with a mixture of confusion, anger, and hurt. "David, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, setting down her bag. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her, searching her face for any sign of guilt. "Who is Thomas?" I finally asked, my voice low. Laura froze. Her eyes darted toward the floor, then back to me. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to act confused. I didn't let her off the hook so easily. "The text message. The one where you said you missed him and couldn't wait to see him next weekend." Her face turned pale. I could see the panic in her eyes, but she quickly tried to recover. "David, I can explain. It's not what you think." I stood up, my frustration rising. "Then explain it to me, Laura. Because right now, I'm starting to think everything I've believed about us has been a lie." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I watched her, waiting for the truth, for something, anything, that would make sense of what I had just found. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started a long time ago, before I even knew how to handle it. Thomas and I, we became close, but it never meant anything. It was just an escape from everything that was falling apart between us." The words hit me like a slap to the face. She had been seeing Thomas for years, and I had no idea. I had no clue that the woman I trusted, the one I had committed my life to, had been carrying on an affair behind my back for so long. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. All I could feel was a searing pain in my chest, the betrayal so overwhelming that it seemed to consume me. "You've been seeing him. For how long, Laura?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. Her eyes welled up with tears as she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "For 5 years, David. 5 years." I let out a bitter laugh, though it didn't feel funny at all. 5 years? You've been lying to me for that long? And I never saw it. She reached out, trying to touch my arm. "David, I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted this." But I couldn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't sympathize with the woman who had shattered everything I thought we had. "I don't want to hear it, Laura," I said, pulling away from her touch. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, broken and silent. The betrayal had done more than just hurt me. It had changed everything. I couldn't stay in this marriage anymore. Not with her. Not after everything she had hidden from me. I had always believed that our love could overcome anything. That trust was the foundation of everything we built together. But now, I realized how fragile it all was. The trust, the love, it was all gone. But as I sat there in the living room, alone with my thoughts, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of something else. Something for me. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, unable to focus on anything. I couldn't stop thinking about the message. Was it just an innocent text? Or was there something more going on between Laura and Thomas? The thought made my stomach turn, and I felt a knot form in my chest. When Laura returned home later that evening, she seemed completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. She walked in with her usual cheerful smile, but I couldn't bring myself to greet her with the same enthusiasm. Instead, I just stared at her, my eyes filled with a mixture of confusion, anger, and hurt. "David, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, setting down her bag. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her, searching her face for any sign of guilt. "Who is Thomas?" I finally asked, my voice low. Laura froze. Her eyes darted toward the floor, then back to me. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to act confused. I didn't let her off the hook so easily. "The text message. The one where you said you missed him and couldn't wait to see him next weekend." Her face turned pale. I could see the panic in her eyes, but she quickly tried to recover. "David, I can explain. It's not what you think." I stood up, my frustration rising. "Then explain it to me, Laura. Because right now, I'm starting to think everything I've believed about us has been a lie." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I watched her, waiting for the truth, for something, anything, that would make sense of what I had just found. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started a long time ago, before I even knew how to handle it. Thomas and I, we became close, but it never meant anything. It was just an escape from everything that was falling apart between us." The words hit me like a slap to the face. She had been seeing Thomas for years, and I had no idea. I had no clue that the woman I trusted, the one I had committed my life to, had been carrying on an affair behind my back for so long. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. All I could feel was a searing pain in my chest, the betrayal so overwhelming that it seemed to consume me. "You've been seeing him. For how long, Laura?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. Her eyes welled up with tears as she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. For 5 years, David. 5 years. I let out a bitter laugh, though it didn't feel funny at all. 5 years? You've been lying to me for that long? And I never saw it. She reached out, trying to touch my arm. David, I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted this, but I couldn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't sympathize with the woman who had shattered everything I thought we had. I'm leaving, I said quietly. I need to get away. I need to figure out what comes next. She didn't argue. She just sat there, silent, as I grabbed my things and walked out the door. The first night alone. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay in that house. The house that we had built together. The house that now felt like a prison. I drove around for a while, not really knowing where I was heading. My mind was a blur, but I couldn't get the image of Laura's face, her tears, out of my mind. The betrayal had cut deep, deeper than I had ever imagined. But I couldn't stay in that pain. I had to get out, to do something with all the anger and hurt that was flooding me. I ended up at a small hotel near the outskirts of the city, the kind of place you don't plan on staying at for long. I checked in, grabbed a room key, and slumped into the bed, staring at the ceiling for hours, unable to sleep. I felt numb. I wasn't sure how to feel. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to punish Laura for what she had done. But that wasn't going to fix anything. In fact, it would only make it worse. I had spent so many years living for someone else, trying to make our relationship work, trying to keep things perfect. But now, all of that was gone. Everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, was shattered. It was hard to breathe, but I knew I couldn't stay in this fog forever. I had a choice to make. I could let this defeat me. I could stay in the pain, let the betrayal destroy me, and let Laura's actions define my life. Or I could choose to change. I could choose to take control of my life and rebuild it. It was time for me to take a step back and figure out who I was without her. The decision to move on. The next morning, I woke up to an empty room and a heavy heart. The sunlight was streaming through the blinds, but I felt anything but bright. I knew I couldn't stay in the hotel for much longer. It was time to make a decision. I decided to leave the hotel and check into an apartment for a while. I needed space. I needed time to think. I couldn't be in the same house, surrounded by the same memories. I needed to clear my head, to be alone, and process everything. The first few days in the apartment were quiet. It felt strange being alone. I had spent so many years living with Laura, with the constant hum of her presence in my life. Now, everything was still. I spent the days going through old photos, cleaning out some things, and trying to make sense of what had happened. But most of all, I spent time thinking about the future. One afternoon, I sat down with a notebook and started writing. For the first time in my life, I wrote down my feelings. Everything I had bottled up inside. I am stronger than this. I will not let this betrayal define me. I will rebuild my life, and I will do it for myself. I will not let her mistakes break me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I had to start over. I couldn't keep holding on to the past, on to the hurt. It was time to let go, taking control. A few days later, I met with a therapist. I had never considered therapy before, but I realized that I needed help navigating this new chapter in my life. I couldn't do it alone. I had been in this relationship for so long that I had lost track of who I was outside of it. The therapist helped me work through my feelings, and slowly, I began to realize something important. This wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life. I had spent so many years living for someone else that I had forgotten what it meant to live for myself. As the days went by, I started to feel a shift. The pain was still there, but I was learning to manage it. I was learning to forgive myself for not seeing the signs earlier, and I was starting to accept that this chapter in my life was over. But I wasn't going to let this be the end. This was just the beginning. I had spent the last few weeks trying to adjust to my new reality. The pain from Laura's betrayal was still fresh, but each passing day, I felt myself growing stronger. I had set some boundaries, spent more time working on my personal growth, and started focusing on things I hadn't even realized I had neglected. But the truth was, I had spent so many years defining myself by my marriage and by what Laura thought of me, that now I didn't know exactly who I was. The first step was accepting that I'd been living in denial. For 5 years, I had ignored the small signs, the little changes in Laura's behavior, the late-night texts, the unexplained absences. But now, with everything laid bare, I could no longer hide from the truth. One morning, after a long night of tossing and turning, I decided it was time to take action. I could no longer afford to sit idly by and let life pass me. I had to make choices that would empower me and give me control over my future. I began by cutting off all communication with Laura. No more excuses, no more attempts to make things work. I couldn't keep trying to fix something that had already been broken for a long time. It felt strange at first, like I was abandoning a part of myself. But deep down, I knew it was the only way forward, facing the past. The first time I saw Laura after our confrontation was harder than I had expected. I had moved my things out of the house and into a small apartment a few weeks earlier, but she still lived there. I had been avoiding her calls, her messages, everything. But there were still things that needed to be addressed. She needed to know that I wasn't going to stand for the way she had treated me, and I needed to tell her that I was done. I decided to meet her at a cafe, a neutral location where we could have one final conversation. When I saw her sitting there, waiting, I felt a pang of sadness. She looked the same, but there was something different about her now. Maybe it was the way her eyes wouldn't meet mine, or the way she fidgeted with her coffee cup. I wasn't sure, but I knew this was it, the last time I'd see her like this. I sat down across from her, not saying anything for a few moments. The silence was heavy, and neither of us seemed sure where to start. "David," she said softly, breaking the silence, her voice shaky. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I betrayed you, and I'm sorry." Her words felt hollow. I had heard them before, so many times over the past few weeks, but each time they seemed to lose meaning. "I don't need your apology anymore, Laura," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I needed your honesty, but you couldn't give me that. Now I'm giving myself the one thing I've needed all along, the chance to move on." Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy for her. Not anymore. "Please," she whispered, "don't say that. I never meant for this to happen. I was just so lost. I didn't know how to get out." "You didn't want to get out," I said, leaning forward. "You kept choosing him over me. And now you're sitting here, trying to make it sound like it was some mistake. But it wasn't. It was a choice. And that's the difference." She looked at me, her face crumpling with emotion. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, but I shook my head. "Sorry doesn't fix this. It doesn't fix the years you stole from me. It doesn't change the fact that you broke me." I stood up, my heart heavy, but also oddly light. "Goodbye, Laura. I'm done. It's over. The next step, reclaiming my life. Walking away from that meeting was harder than I could have imagined, but I knew it was the right choice. I didn't feel any anger towards her anymore, just a quiet resolve. The conversation had ended, and now it was time for me to move forward with my life. I spent the next few weeks sorting through everything in my life. My work, my passions, my goals. All of it had been pushed aside for so long. But now, I was waking up to the person I had always wanted to be. It wasn't just about cutting ties with Laura. It was about reclaiming myself and my future. I started exercising again, something I hadn't done in years. I enrolled in a photography class, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I even reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in ages, reconnecting with the people who had been there for me before, the ones who truly cared about me. I realized that I had been so focused on making Laura happy, on trying to fix a relationship that was broken beyond repair, that I had forgotten about myself. I had ignored the things that made me happy, the things that brought me joy outside of my marriage. And now, I was finally rediscovering those passions, the strength to move forward. A few months later, I found myself in a new place, both physically and mentally. I had moved into a new apartment, one that felt more like me. The walls were bare, but they felt like a blank canvas, ready to be filled with new memories, new experiences, and a new life. My career had taken off as well. I had been promoted at work, not because of any relationship with Laura, but because of my dedication and skills. I had worked hard for everything I had, and now that hard work was paying off. I had even started dating again. It wasn't easy at first. Being vulnerable after everything that had happened felt like a huge risk. But with time, I realized that I deserved happiness. I wasn't going to let Laura's mistakes dictate my future. I had learned to trust again, but more importantly, I had learned to trust myself. Looking back, one day, as I sat by the window of my new apartment, looking out over the city, I realized just how far I had come. The pain of the betrayal had faded. I wasn't angry anymore. Instead, I was grateful for the lessons I had learned. I had been forced to face the truth, and that truth had set me free. The truth wasn't just about what Laura had done. It was about who I was becoming. I was no longer defined by my past, my marriage, or the mistakes of others. I was forging my own path, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. It had been several months since that day with Laura. Time had passed, and although the emotional wounds were still there, they were healing. I was beginning to understand that life wasn't about dwelling on the past, but about how you chose to move forward. And so, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let my past define my future. I spent the first few weeks in my new apartment, finding my footing, creating a routine that was mine alone. It felt strange at first, living alone after years of marriage, having the freedom to make decisions without consulting anyone. But in a strange way, it was liberating. I had spent so long adjusting my life to fit someone else's needs. My own desires had fallen by the wayside. Now, it was time to put myself first. I threw myself into work, not as an escape, but as a way to rebuild my confidence. I had received a promotion after a series of successful campaigns, and I was determined to prove that I was capable of even more. It wasn't about impressing my bosses or my colleagues anymore. It was about proving to myself that I still had value beyond my previous relationship. Each day brought new challenges, but I was no longer afraid of them. I had dealt with betrayal, and I had come out the other side stronger. The fear of failure had gripped me for so long, but I realized that the true failure would be not trying, not taking control of my own destiny. Outside of work, I started to make more time for the things I enjoyed, things I had long neglected. Photography, something I had always loved but never pursued seriously, became my outlet. I enrolled in a weekend course and began taking photos of the city. There was something about capturing the world through a lens that brought me peace. I hadn't realized how much I missed the simple joy of being creative. At first, it was just a hobby, but I soon realized that it was a way for me to connect with myself again. I wasn't just the husband who had been betrayed. I was David, a man with passions, dreams, and the ability to build a life for himself again. I started taking photography more seriously, even looking into selling some of my work online. As the weeks went by, I also reconnected with old friends, people who had always been there, even when I had become distant during my marriage. I reached out to them, letting them know what had happened, and their support meant the world to me. It was amazing how much love and encouragement I had around me, yet I had been blind to it all while I was in that toxic relationship. But perhaps the most unexpected part of my journey was meeting Grace, a woman I had known briefly through a mutual friend. She was smart, funny, and kind, and we hit it off instantly. It wasn't like I was looking for someone to replace Laura. I had long made peace with the fact that my marriage was over. But Grace was different. She was patient with me, understanding when I needed time to process, and gentle with the part of me that was still healing. We started dating casually, but over time, I found myself opening up again, trusting someone, and letting myself feel vulnerable. The first few dates were tentative, full of hesitation, as I wasn't sure I could ever trust another person like I had trusted Laura. But Grace didn't pressure me. She allowed me to move at my own pace. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it felt good to be with someone who respected my boundaries and didn't try to rush things. The moment of truth. One evening, after a particularly successful day at work, I decided to take Grace to a local restaurant for dinner. We were enjoying the meal, talking about everything and nothing, when she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "David," she began, her voice soft, "do you ever think about what you went through? The betrayal, the hurt. Does it ever cross your mind?" I stopped eating and set my fork down, looking at her. I hadn't really talked about my past much with her, and I wasn't sure I was ready to dive into all the details. But there was something in the way she asked, the genuine concern in her eyes, that made me feel like it was time. "I think about it every day," I said honestly, my voice steady. "But I don't let it control me anymore. I've learned a lot from that time. And most importantly, I've learned that I can't let someone else's actions define my future." Grace nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I admire that about you, David, the way you've taken control of your life again. It's not easy." I smiled, a weight lifting from my shoulders as I spoke my truth. It wasn't easy. It's still not easy. But it's the only way to move forward. I can't change what happened, but I can control how I respond. I can choose to make something good out of the mess. Grace reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "And you're doing it, David. You're doing great." For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had truly found my footing again. Not just in my career, but in my personal life. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to take on whatever came next. The road ahead. As I continued to rebuild my life, I made sure to keep one thing in mind. I was no longer living in the shadow of my past. I had learned that true happiness came from within, and I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was complete on my own. The road to healing wasn't a straight line, and I knew I would have my ups and downs. But with every step, I felt more empowered, more confident, and more in control of the person I was becoming. I wasn't looking for a perfect life. I was looking for a life that was real, one that was full of love, respect, and honesty. I didn't need to be defined by the betrayal of my past. I was David Michaels, a man who had been through the storm and come out the other side stronger. And now, I was finally living my life for me. It had been a year since I first walked away from Laura. A year of building a new life, one that I could finally call my own. Every day had been a step toward healing, and each step had brought me closer to the person I had always wanted to be. But what struck me most was how much I had grown. I had learned to rediscover myself in ways I never thought possible. After everything that had happened, I thought I'd never want a relationship again. But I was wrong. I had met Grace, and things were different. I wasn't looking for her to replace Laura. I didn't need someone to fill the void left behind by my marriage. But Grace had brought something into my life that I hadn't realized I needed: peace. She wasn't a distraction. She was a reminder that love, real love, was built on respect, trust, and mutual understanding. Grace had allowed me to heal without rushing me, without pushing me to move on or forget the past. She understood that my heart needed time to be whole again, and she gave me that space. I felt safe with her, and that was more important to me than anything else. For the first time in months, I was able to enjoy the simple joys of being with someone who cared for me without any ulterior motives. The challenge of moving forward. However, not all of my life was as smooth as my relationship with Grace. Work was progressing well, but the more I thought about my career, the more I realized that I had been using it as a crutch. I had thrown myself into my job after the divorce, hoping it would distract me from the pain. But as I reached new heights in my career and my personal life, I couldn't ignore the fact that I wasn't truly living the life I wanted. There was a part of me that longed for more. I wanted to take risks, do something creative, something that made me feel truly alive. I had spent so many years focusing on climbing the corporate ladder, but now I wasn't sure if that was still the path I wanted to follow. The truth was, I had lost my passion along the way, and though I was successful in my work, it felt empty. I wasn't doing what made me happy. I had always wanted to start my own business, something I was passionate about, something that aligned with my personal values. But the idea of stepping away from my stable job was terrifying. I had never taken such a risk before. It was comfortable where I was, and it was easy to stay in the same place. But I couldn't ignore the voice inside me that said, "You can do more. You can be more." After months of considering it, I decided to take the leap. I left my position at the marketing firm and started my own digital consulting business. It was a huge risk. I knew that. But after everything I had been through, I realized that life was too short to not take a chance. If I could overcome the betrayal of my marriage, then I could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Building something new. The early days of running my own business were tough. There were long nights, sleepless hours, and moments of doubt where I questioned whether I had made the right choice. But there was also a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. I was doing something that felt right, something that excited me. I was no longer working for the approval of others. I was doing it for myself. I started small, taking on local clients who needed help building their online presence and marketing strategies. The business grew slowly at first, but I was learning. I was adapting. The success wasn't instant, but I was building it from the ground up, just like I had with everything else in my life. Grace was incredibly supportive during this time. She never pressured me, never questioned my decisions. She just believed in me, and that belief meant everything. We had been dating seriously for about 6 months, and I could feel the connection between us growing stronger. We talked about our future, our goals, and our dreams. There was no rush, no pressure, just an understanding that we were both building something meaningful together. But there was also something else I realized in those months, something deeper. I had been afraid of losing myself in a relationship, of losing my independence like I had in my marriage with Laura. But with Grace, I felt secure. I felt like I could be myself without fear of betrayal or abandonment. I could be both independent and loved. The weight of the past. Despite all the progress I had made, there were still days when the weight of the past seemed to creep up on me. Every now and then, I'd think back to the days with Laura, and the hurt would resurface. I had loved her with all my heart, and I had never imagined that she could betray me like that. But as I looked at the life I was now building, I realized that the past no longer had power over me. The hurt, the betrayal, they didn't define me anymore. They were part of my story, but they weren't the ending. I was writing my own ending now. I had learned so much through the process of healing, of rebuilding my life, and of learning to trust again. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I had come out of the other side of heartbreak, stronger and more confident in who I was. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided by betrayal. I was the man who had risen from the ashes of his past, who had taken control of his future. The new chapter 6. Months after starting my business, I could finally see the fruits of my labor. My client base was expanding, and the projects were coming in at a steady pace. I wasn't rich by any means, but I was doing what I loved, and I was building something I could be proud of. Grace and I had been talking more seriously about our future. We had even started talking about moving in together, though we were both taking our time. I knew I wasn't ready to rush into anything, and neither was she. But the difference between my relationship with her and the one I had with Laura was night and day. There was no pressure. There was no fear. There was only trust. One afternoon, after an intense meeting with a new client, I received a message from Laura. She had been trying to reach me for weeks, but I had ignored her calls. I had no interest in speaking to her, but for some reason, I opened the message. David, I'm sorry for everything. I know I hurt you. I never meant for things to go the way they did. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time. There was no anger inside me anymore. No desire for revenge. Only indifference. I had moved on. And I had found peace. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. As the months passed, I found myself getting closer to the person I'd once been, before everything fell apart. In the wake of Laura's betrayal, I had spent so much time questioning my worth, doubting my ability to trust again, and wondering if I would ever be truly happy. But now, with each passing day, I could see the changes in myself. I was no longer defined by the past. I was building a future that was mine alone. I had faced the hardest thing anyone could face: betrayal by the one person I had trusted with my heart. But instead of allowing it to destroy me, I chose to let it fuel my journey towards self-discovery and empowerment. I realized that in letting go of Laura, I had gained something far more valuable: freedom. But there were still days when I struggled with the weight of the past. Days when the memories of our life together resurfaced, and I wondered if I would ever truly be free of them. The truth was, healing wasn't linear. There were moments of peace and moments of deep sorrow. But in those moments, I began to understand that it was okay to feel everything. The hurt, the anger, the sadness. It was all part of my healing process. The moment I realized I wasn't alone. A few weeks into my new life, I had a conversation with Grace that I had been avoiding. Although our relationship had grown stronger, there was still a part of me that was hesitant to fully commit. I was afraid of repeating my past mistakes. I was afraid of trusting someone again, only to have them betray me. But Grace was different. She wasn't rushing me. She never pressured me. And in the quiet moments we shared together, I began to realize that she wasn't just someone to distract me from the pain. She was someone who truly cared about me, someone who saw me for who I was, without the baggage of my past relationships. One evening, after a long day of work, we sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset together. The air was cool, and there was a peacefulness in the silence between us. But eventually, Grace broke the quiet. "David," she said softly, her voice gentle, "I know this is hard for you. I can see the weight of everything you've been through. And I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her words hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. I had been so afraid of being hurt again. But in that moment, I realized that I didn't have to face everything alone. I didn't have to carry the weight of my past by myself. Grace had offered me the gift of her presence, her patience, and her understanding. "I know, Grace," I said, my voice a little choked, "and I'm grateful for you. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm starting to believe that maybe I can be happy again. Not because of anything or anyone else, but because I'm finally starting to let go of the past." Grace smiled, and I could see the genuine warmth in her eyes. "We'll take it one step at a time, okay? There's no rush. We're in this together, whatever it looks like." And in that moment, I realized something crucial. True freedom wasn't about moving on or pretending the past didn't exist. It was about being willing to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that I was capable of navigating the unknown, even if it meant facing it with vulnerability and courage. Facing the past head on. While my relationship with Grace grew stronger, there was still a part of me that knew I had to face my past head on. I hadn't spoken to Laura since the day I left, and though I had moved on emotionally, there were unresolved feelings that lingered in the background. I knew that in order to move forward fully, I needed to have one final conversation with Laura. I needed to tell her how I felt, how her betrayal had affected me, but also how I had healed and found a way to move forward. It wasn't easy to make that decision, but I realized that if I didn't address these feelings, I would carry them with me forever. I didn't need her approval, but I needed closure. I needed to know that I had taken control of the situation and had allowed myself to heal fully. I called Laura and asked if she could meet me at a cafe. She agreed, and we set a time for the following day. The final conversation. When I saw Laura sitting at the table, my heart didn't race. It wasn't filled with anger or resentment. Instead, it was filled with an odd sense of peace. This was the woman I had once loved, the woman who had shattered my trust. But today, she wasn't the same person in my life that she once was. She was a chapter I had already closed. She stood up as I approached, her expression cautious. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was the same, her smile the same, but something in her eyes had shifted. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was regret. But it didn't matter. I wasn't here to get answers from her anymore. "David," she said softly, her voice breaking, "I'm sorry. I know I hurt you more than I could ever explain. I can't take back what I did. I never wanted to cause you this much pain. I nodded, my gaze steady. I know, Laura. I know you're sorry. And I've heard it before. But I've moved on. I've let go of the anger, and I've let go of the hurt. I'm finally at peace with everything that happened. Laura's eyes welled up with tears, but I wasn't moved by her sorrow. I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked away from her. I had found my peace, and I wasn't going to let her guilt pull me back into the past. I'm glad you're okay, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. You did, I said quietly, but it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I'm free now, free to move forward, free to live my life the way I should have all along. Laura remained silent, and I could see the pain in her eyes. But I wasn't there to offer her solace. I was there to offer myself closure. I stood up and gave her one last look before turning away. Goodbye, Laura. I hope you find what you're looking for. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had faced my past, and I'd let go of the things that no longer served me. I had finally broken free from the shackles of my old life, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. It had been several months since I'd had that final conversation with Laura. The truth, the hurt, and the finality of it all were now behind me. And as time went on, I found myself not just healing, but thriving in ways I hadn't imagined possible. At first, the idea of being alone, truly alone, seemed daunting. It had always been Laura and me. The thought of going forward without her felt like an impossible task. But little by little, I realized that I wasn't alone anymore. I had my friends, my family, and most importantly, I had myself. I was learning to depend on my own strength and resilience. I had invested so much of myself into my marriage, into making things work, that I had neglected parts of myself that had nothing to do with her. It was only after everything fell apart that I realized how much of my own identity I had sacrificed. I began taking on new challenges, both personal and professional. I had started my own consulting firm, helping small businesses create digital strategies to succeed in the ever-changing market. The work was fulfilling, but more than that, it was something I was doing for me. I was in control, and for the first time in a long while, it felt incredible. I had also reconnected with passions I had long forgotten: photography, traveling, and even writing. I spent weekends hiking and taking photographs of the world around me, capturing moments of beauty that reminded me there was so much more to life than the pain I had endured. The weight of betrayal had taught me the importance of living in the moment and appreciating the simple things. I had started to see the world with new eyes that weren't clouded by the lies or the guilt I had once carried. I could finally breathe without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of my past and new relationship. One thing I didn't expect was how my relationship with Grace would evolve. In the beginning, I wasn't sure if I was ready for a serious commitment. I had been hurt too much to open my heart again. But with Grace, things felt different. She wasn't like Laura. She was kind, patient, and most importantly, she was willing to let me heal at my own pace. She never pushed me, never rushed me, and that gave me the space I needed. As time went on, we grew closer. It wasn't just about her offering comfort after everything I had been through. It was about building something healthy, something new. Grace wasn't a replacement for Laura. She was someone who accepted me for who I was, flaws and all, and who respected my journey. One evening, after a particularly good week of work and personal growth, Grace and I sat on the balcony of my apartment, the city skyline stretching out in front of us. It had become one of our favorite places to unwind after long days. You know, she said, her voice soft and thoughtful. I'm really proud of you, David. I see how much you've grown, how much you've come through. I smiled, the weight of her words sinking in. I'm proud of me too, I admitted, my voice steady. I've been through a lot. I've learned that I can handle more than I thought, but I couldn't have done it without your support. Grace reached over and took my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. I'm happy to be here with you, David. Whatever happens next, I'm here. Her words, simple as they were, gave me more comfort than I could explain. I had been afraid to open my heart to someone again, but with Grace, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was ready for it. The final step, letting go of the past. As much as I had grown, there were still parts of the past that I needed to let go of. Parts of Laura that I had held on to for far too long. A few weeks ago, I had found an old box of photos and letters from our early years together. As I sat down on the floor of my apartment, I sorted through the memories. Our wedding photos, vacation snapshots, birthday cards. It felt surreal looking at them. I could see the love we once had, but it also felt distant. It wasn't the love that had ended my marriage. It wasn't the love that I had held on to when everything was falling apart. This was a version of us that no longer existed, and it was time to let it go. I put the box aside, unopened, and took a deep breath. I had already made the decision to move forward, but holding on to these remnants of the past was holding me back. I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need to relive what we had. What mattered now was the life I was creating for myself, the life that was still unfolding. Looking toward the future, I could feel the next chapter of my life beginning to take shape. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. There were no more questions about my worth, no more doubts about my ability to move on. I had taken control of my future, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. The business was growing. Grace and I had started to talk about the future, about possibly moving in together, building something together that was based on mutual trust and understanding. We weren't rushing. We were taking it one step at a time, but I knew that whatever happened, I was ready. I had come a long way from the man who had been betrayed, the man who had felt hopeless and lost. Now, I was a man who had rebuilt his life, who had found happiness in the smallest moments, and who was no longer afraid to face the future. I had learned the hardest lessons in life, but I had learned them well. I was no longer defined by the pain of my past. I was defined by the strength I had found within myself. And now, I was moving forward with a confidence I had never known before.